Welcome to the Unconditionally Worthy podcast. In this podcast, I will guide you on your journey to connect with the true source of your self-worth. I'm your host, Dr. Adia Gooden, a licensed clinical psychologist who believes deeply that you are worthy unconditionally.
I am really excited and honored to welcome my guest to the podcast today. Her name is Mohini, and she uses emotional release practices to guide others to connect with the depths of themselves, release stagnation of energy and trauma from the body in order to create space for all of their juiciest desires to come alive. She uses her prior 12 years in education in new ways within creative and wellness spaces to support people to tap into their fullest emotional expression and create self-intimacy via verbal and nonverbal communication using their body, senses, and movement. This integration of awareness and presence is living an intimate tantric lifestyle. Mohini has curated multiple embodiment experiences for artists such as Lizzie Jeff and Londrell, as well as festivals, many workshops, and retreats. If you want to release self-judgment, shame, and guilt so that you can activate your voice and innate body wisdom, create deeper levels of self-trust and intimacy, emotional expression, then connect with Mohini, and you are going to get a taste of her wisdom on this episode of the podcast. Welcome, Mohini.
So excited to be here. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to dive in.
Yeah, you're welcome. We actually met in Puerto Rico. We were at a business conference and attended this dinner that was in Old San Juan. And we just had this really great conversation about, self-worth and embodiment and I think womb wisdom and lots of different things. And I was kind of like, this Mohini would be a great person to have on the podcast. And so that was back in January. And I'm so grateful that you were willing to come on the podcast and share your wisdom. And so I would love to just start our conversation where I start all of my conversations with guests, which is by asking you to share a bit about your own self-worth journey.
It has definitely been a journey, to say the least. I feel like I lived much of my life where I did not even know self-worth was a thing. It was not modeled to me. I feel like many women, especially women of color, we're not taught these kind of things. It's not modeled to us. Society, culture, all of these things really ingrain in us and teach us to not really tap into ourselves and to outsource a lot of our power. So maybe you can relate to that. Maybe your listeners can relate to that, of just not really feeling connected with yourself. And that was a big part of my journey, was just feeling really, really disconnected from myself, not knowing my worth. I lived much of my life in that space. And then once I kind of awakened to, wait, I'm the one holding myself back. I am the one that is keeping myself in these unhealthy relationships and patterns, and really reflecting as to why. That's sort of where my journey really started to unfold for me, and is really when I started to become just aware of, oh wait, these patterns are showing up. Okay, why? Where did these come from? Where did these come from? Did it come from my mom? Did it come from my family? Patriarchy? All of these different layers, and just becoming open to how I even got to this place of feeling unworthy. And then what do I do with this new information?
Yeah, I mean, I love that you're sort of highlighting the both and of, we are often the ones holding ourselves back, and it's often conditioned by society, by our family. So we have to acknowledge that context, and we can't stay there, right? We also have to own our role,
Yes.
our role in keeping ourselves stuck, our role in giving away our power. And that, I think, for some people is one of the hardest things to do, is to acknowledge that without shaming and blaming, but to acknowledge it to take back your power and then do something different.
Yeah, absolutely. To take that radical responsibility for your life and to realize that, oh, wait, I am actually the one who's creating my life. I am worthy of actually stepping into and creating my desires, making those desires a reality. It takes a lot of accountability of self. And it really starts with that awareness of that you have that power within you. It can be a lot easier sometimes to blame other
Mm,
people and to say, well, the reason I'm not doing X, Y, and Z, or I don't have
mm,
this lifestyle that I'm living, or I'm not feeling this level of desire is because of my parents, or because of
mm,
my partner, or because of my kids, or because of my boss, right? It's a lot
mm-hmm,
easier to say, oh, it's because of them.
mm-hmm,
But when you really drop in with yourself and take that responsibility, okay, I'm outsourcing my power to them.
mm,
That's where the worthiness piece kicks in. Oh, okay,
mm-hmm.
you get to drop in with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're both on this sort of entrepreneurial journey. And I think there's a lot of those things that have been coming up for me, which is
Mm.
like, okay, so I'm creating an environment and a situation for myself where I feel rushed, where I feel stressed, where I feel I have too much to do. And I can't blame anybody. Like, I no longer have a boss to blame.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
I no longer have a system, like a company, organization to say they're just chaotic and da 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 da. It's like, so I am creating this myself. Why am I doing that? Kind of like what you said, like, where is this coming from?
Mhm.
And how do I courageously start to do something different? Because I don't want this for myself. And
Right.
I'm the one who is responsible for doing something different.
Yeah, and again, there's many layers to this because yes, we're responsible, but also I feel this unworthiness because of the systems that be
Mm,
in place. It's not me. If I was on an isolated island somewhere, I probably wouldn't be feeling this.
right.
But because of these different layers of um, suppression, that's why these kind of feelings and thoughts come into play, and why the unworthiness even exists in the first place. I feel.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other thing, and I'm hoping it's okay to bring in some pieces that I know about your story. So hopefully you're
Sure.
okay sharing,
Yeah, absolutely.
but is that it can be scary to start to disrupt patterns and do
Oh, yeah.
something different because often it ends up in us losing things, right? And
Mm,
potentially losing jobs, losing relationships, losing connection, losing ways of living that have made us comfortable. And even if we're it's dysfunctional,
mhm.
right? Like there's this dysfunctional comfort, it still can be scary to release them. And I know that you've had experiences like that. So I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share a bit about what
Yes.
that has looked like, and then also sort of tell people about the freedom that's come on the other side, and why it's worth it.
Okay, great. Yes. So I have been exploring the art of letting go. And
Mm,
the with that comes a lot of surrender and trust. And I realized how much I really desired to control things in my life. And that was rooted from my past childhood trauma stuff that made me want to be able to. I couldn't control some of those things growing up. So as an adult growing up, how could I best control in a situation? How can I best control someone else so that chaos doesn't ensue?
mm-hmm,
So the art of letting go for me was, it came with a lot of understanding all of the boxes that I had already been checking off and living a life that wasn't truly mine.
mm,
And when I started to understand this is where the worthiness part kicks in, is because who am I to break these patterns and to even question these patterns? One, to begin with, like, who am I to even question these patterns? Because I'm supposed to just be chugging along. And
mm-hmm,
when I'm chugging along, that worked to a certain degree, but then I also felt really unfulfilled.
mm,
And so the part of me for letting go was, one, I have no idea what's on the other side of letting go of a very long-term relationship a house, a beautiful house, a career that I spent a whole lot of money on for multiple degrees and time and clinicals and working and all of this experience and networking and all of these things, friendships. And who am I to just let all of this go to start something completely new and fresh? And I'd never done anything quite like that before. And so it was a real practice in trusting myself and trusting that I'm being guided to do something beyond these material check boxes, like, and really explore more of this inner work and understand, well, that worthiness, like, well, why did I stay in this marriage for so long? Why did I stay in this career for so long when I had this inner call? I had this inner knowing that I'm meant for more, but I didn't trust myself enough to do more with that. And I feel like a lot of times people are just really scared to let go. And I get it. It can be very scary to do something that you haven't done before. But like you said, if you want different results, you got to do something different and you have to be different. Right? Like, I forget who says that saying, Albert Einstein or someone, I don't remember. Whoever says that saying, if you want the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same things over and over again, expecting different results, right? We can't keep doing the same thing if we want a different life. And it comes to, for me, it really just, keeps coming back to the worthiness piece. And that stuff lives in your body. That unworthiness, you don't feel safe in your body. You don't feel like you can take a courageous, brave step forward. So it's a lot of unlearning, and it's a lot of rewiring and connecting to your body in new ways that you can listen. It requires a lot of slowing down, and that's part of that trust.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, because I think that sort of the fear of the unknown, the fear of what's on the other side is often what keeps people stuck in a place that might not feel so good. And I think, it doesn't always mean that your whole life is going to change, right? Like sometimes there's shifts and adjustments. And it takes courage, right, to make a change. And I think the other thing you're speaking to is that it does take tuning into yourself to even recognize, like, I am disconnected to myself from myself, or I am unhappy, or I am following, unwritten, unspoken mandates from my family, from community, from society versus what I truly want.
Yep.
And I feel like that connects to what you talk about related to self-intimacy. And I'd love for you to share a little bit more about kind of what are the elements of self-intimacy, and how do people start to cultivate that for themselves?
Yeah, great question. So I feel like we live in a very go, go, go world. It's very hectic, on to the next thing. Our calendars are incredibly full of life stuff. It's like you go to work, you go pick up your kid, you go to soccer practice. Maybe there's time to cook dinner. Maybe you're just picking something up on the way home from soccer practice, eat something real quick, rinse and repeat, scroll for a couple hours, and that's it, And we're not intentionally creating time to really be with ourselves. And this is also by design, I feel. Society doesn't want you to slow down, because when you slow down, you're actually tuning to the wisdom that you have within you, and you're tuning into the power, you're tuning into the answers that you have within that they want you to outsource. So when you quiet down the mind and you're actually connecting within, that's where you realize you have your power, and society doesn't want you to tune into that. So that self-intimacy for me starts with slowing the heck down. Just slow it down. chill for just a few moments. And for me, I live a tantric lifestyle, and what that means for me, it has nothing. Well, I shouldn't. It has very minimal to
It's
do
not
with
all
sex.
about sex.
It has very, very, very minimal to do with sex,
Mm,
actually. And that's a
mm,
huge misconception about Tantra, that it's all about sex. But truly, Tantra is all about being present. And in
mm,
order to be present, you need to slow down.
mm,
And to slow down, you need to turn off your mind and turn on your body.
mm,
And when you turn on your body, you're connecting to your senses. That means you've slowed down enough to feel the coldness of the floor on your feet. Or you
mhm,
slow down enough to smell this wilting rose that I have here. But, I
mhm,
take the time to smell this. And you feel the sun on your skin. And really connecting to your senses. Living a sensual life means connecting to your senses.
mhm,
So, one, it's slowing down. And self-intimacy, to me, intimacy can mean a few different things. It can mean either into me, I see,
mhm,
right? So that means I'm looking at myself and doing that inner, what's going on inside. Again, if
mhm,
society is encouraging us externally to look for the answers, into me, I see means, oh snap, I have the answers inside.
mhm,
So
mhm.
it's really about reflecting inward and creating that intimacy with self. If you want
Yep,
deeper relationships with other people, well, how's your relationship with yourself?
yep,
You can't meet
mhm,
people, you can only meet other people as deep as you've gone within yourself.
yep,
So that self-intimacy is, for me, understanding that everything is really connected. We're connected to nature. We're connected to each other more than we give ourselves, even credit or understanding to even have a conversation with someone else. We're just so caught off from other people. People walking down the street and we barely even make eye contact with them.
mm,
Acknowledge them, So it's like slowing
mhm,
down, make eye contact, say, hey. It doesn't need to become your best friend. They don't need to become your best friend, but just acknowledging a human.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
yeah, so it really, for me, it always comes back to self, and that is
mhm.
what allows us to have deeper relationships in our life.
Yeah. I love that. I love so much of what you're saying, right? And you started by saying like there's sort of this design, right? We know that our attention is a commodity, right? And it's a commodity
Mhm.
for advertisements to get us to buy things. And, often if I'm taking like a psychological framework, if I'm trying to help someone shift their behavior, the prescription is to pause,
Yes.
right? Before you buy the thing, before you do the thing, before you, whatever it is, pause, right? And that's so aligned with what you're saying, which is slow down because, we have so many inputs coming at us and
Mhm.
they often drown out our intuition, our inner knowing.
Yes.
And we have to get quiet enough because it is a quiet voice. It is a quiet physical knowing, right? Like however that intuition comes through, it's going to be quiet until it like you take it to the the limit and it's like shouts at you and sits you down, right? In
Yep.
some way, right? But generally it's quiet. And so that slowing down to tune into ourselves, to pay attention to what we need, it's also making me think about sort of often I hear, people in this sort of online business world be like, clarity comes from action. Clarity comes from action. So just like do something. And I'm always like, like maybe
Mm-hmm.
there is some clarity in experimentation, but often I feel like be still,
Yes.
right? Like
Mhm.
take a moment, be still. Don't like feel like you have to rush after ABC, XYZ because it's almost gone or whatever. Like be still, take a moment, tune in, get to know what you are feeling and what you are thinking, hopefully free from what all the shoulds and all the you have
Yes.
tos and all the other people expect and all the what if I miss out, but the what is your truth that you can find inside of you.
Absolutely. And that slowing down can be scary because you don't know what's going to come up, right? Like if you haven't slowed down, if you haven't listened in a week, in a month, in a year, in 10 years, in 30 years, right? You don't know what's going to come up. And so that can become a little unnerving for people. And what I've seen when I've facilitated different kind of embodiment practices for people is you don't need to necessarily remember in your mind experiences. Your body remembers, and you can move through that quickly with the proper kind of guidance and the proper processes, if you will, because your body is always listening. Your body's constantly listening. It's cellular. So we're listening to things. So that self-talk, that inner voice that we have multiple inner voices. And that's why that listening is really important, because you get to discern, okay, this inner voice, this inner critic, is this actually my voice? Or is this the voice of my parent when I was 5 years old? Is this the voice of a teacher who told me I was bad at math, and now 30 years later, I still think I'm bad at math? Or is this a best friend who said anything is possible and you believe that? Or is it your voice? And you really get to discern from that intuition versus that fear voice, and decide which volume you want to listen to, which voice you want to listen to, and turn the volume up on the intuitive wisdom that you have, and turn down the volume of that fear that you can't do something, that you're not worthy of it. And another thing is really tuning into the feelings, like that aspect. A lot of people are really nervous and scared to tap into that, because again, if you haven't tuned in, I don't know what's going to come up. I shut down my grief from when my grandmother passed away 20 years ago, or that heartbreak, or that joy. Someone told me along the way, you're too much. And can we allow ourselves the space now as an adult to feel all the full range of human emotions? As messy, I call it a beautiful mess, as much of a beautiful mess as it is, we're not robots.
Right.
We're meant to feel the full range. And it's about creating that space, that stillness, to see what wants to come up to be released, so we can create space for what's coming.
Right. And feeling that we're worthy of feeling our feelings, and then trusting that we're not going to be overtaken by whatever comes up. Like that's often what I hear is people are like, I'm going to feel sad, and the sadness will stay forever if I let it come up. Right. And, I think there's so much alignment in the work that we do. A lot of what I help people with is like releasing inner critics and shifting your relationship with it, and practicing self-compassion so you can move through emotions in a healthy way.
Yes.
And I'm aware of, because of my training as a psychologist, most of my approaches tend to be a little bit more head-centered than body-centered, right? Like there is some sort of, like acknowledging of like how you feel when the emotions, and yet I know that I'm not trained as a somatic or embodiment practitioner. And so I'm really curious about how you approach these things and the practices that you use, like the embodiment practices. And I know you have emotional release practices, right, that you use to guide people to do some of this work, because I think that the work that we kind of help people to do is sort of similar, but the ways that we do it is different. And I'm really a believer that, different people need different things, right? Like different strategies, different practices, and different approaches are going to align better and fit better for certain people. So would just love to hear more. And I know the listeners would love to hear more about your approach to these types of shifts and healing and evolution work.
Yeah. So this goes back to my degrees, and I'm not one at this phase in my life to like really talk about my degrees, because I feel like we're so much more than our degrees and our accolades. And it's applicable here because my undergrad is in psychology and linguistics. My master's degree is in communication sciences and disorders, which is a fancy way to say I worked as a speech language pathologist, which is another way to say I worked as a speech therapist. So I was able to go into a classroom, for example, and work with the quote unquote bad kid, which was not a bad kid, saying that he was just dysregulated for whatever reason, right? I could go into this classroom, work with this quote unquote bad kid, and completely shift his state. How did I do that? By being present with this kid. And then having a conversation with this kid. This kid hasn't eaten breakfast. This kid is sleeping on the floor. You know, he doesn't give a shit about math right now because his body literally cannot handle this kind of information. Okay. So I can go in and simply be present with this kid, which is very often, it's simple yet not easy to be present. Okay. So that to me is like, it's the nervous system regulation. That's the somatic piece. Our bodies are always listening. So if I can go in with a regulated state, I can help another person regulate where they are. That's called co-regulation. Okay. So we get to ebb and flow between co-regulating our nervous system and self-regulating our nervous system. That we can self-regulate by meditation, by movement, by getting out in nature, by getting into a creative flow state, whatever that means for you. All of these things happen in the body somatically. It's not all up in the head. Our emotions are energy in motion. That happens in the body. That's with our feelings, right? We don't feel from our head. We feel with our body. And so for me, how do I bring all of this together is understanding how we gain way more information from our body. More information goes from our body to our brain than from our brain to our body. So for many of us, and this was me included for a good chunk of my life, I was all up in my head. Very much an overthinker, very logical, analytical, disconnected from my body. And as I deepened into myself and into understanding the importance of what lives in my body, I was really able to understand how to move energy, how to move with the emotions and bring not only the science aspect of it, but really bring like the spiritual component, energetic, emotional component too, and how it blends together. Because again, it's all connected. Nervous system stuff is it's science that backs up Kundalini practices and chi and energy and prana, which is all life force energy. Those practices, those beliefs have been around for thousands of years before science came into place. So science is now just confirming these ancient practices.
Yeah, I love that you're talking about self-regulation and co-regulation and really tuning into the wisdom of our bodies. I know that one of the things you talk about, I think specifically, is like the wisdom that's in our wombs. And I'm wondering if you could sort of expound on that and like, how do we even start to tap into that?
Yes. So as women, we can carry a lot of grief and shame and anger in our hip space, which is also our root and sacral energy centers if you are into the chakra system. So these centers the root is all about safety. And so if we don't feel safe in our external environment growing up, which unfortunately many kids don't really feel safe in their environment, that's then reflected in an unsafe feeling in our body. So this is when the disconnection starts. If we've had any kind of sexual trauma, for example, definitely creates a disconnection from our from ourselves, from our body. And then the sacral chakra is all about creativity and sexuality. So again, this is very rooted, right? Like this is very much a huge part of us. So as women, we carry a lot of trauma in this part of our physical and energetic body. And we carry this for years, decades sometimes. And the reason that there's so many ways that we can connect to this wisdom. One of them, again, is including like slowing down. But it really involves feeling these emotions of anger and that grief and that disappointment of maybe you said yes when you really meant no. You didn't know that you could say no. I didn't know boundaries were a thing until friggin' like, I don't know, late 20s, early 30s. And
right. And it wasn't really part of the conversation, right?
No.
Like we're now living through an era where it's like boundaries is a part of the conversation. But 10 years ago, 15 years ago, like boundaries were not like though like offense, you know what I mean? Like it was not part of the conversation.
No, not at all. And so I think for us, like we really get to create space for the pain that we're carrying so that we can get it up and out, so we can release it. Our body, again, carries a whole lot of wisdom. So when we tune into our creativity, when we get into a flow state, for example, time just goes by, right? And a lot of people think, oh, I don't have time for that. I got to go pick up my kid from soccer practice, work, make dinner, dishes, laundry, blah, 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 plan this baby shower for my neighbor, whatever it is. An easy way to tap into your creative flow state is if you were to feel into when you were a kid, what were some of the things that you used to love to do? I personally loved reading. Hence, I have a lot of books. I love reading. I love learning. I love plants. I love like getting my hands dirty. Hence, lots of plants. I love that stuff. And so I would invite our listeners to like think about, feel into what were some of the creative projects and things that you could do as a kid. And do you do any of those now? And if not, what's one thing that you can tap into 10 minutes for the week, even if you want to start at that? Like, it doesn't have to be a whole giant thing, but 10 minutes of getting outside, 10 minutes of cooking something, but making it enjoyable. It's not, oh, I got to rush and I have 10 minutes to make dinner. Oh shit. It's like, how do I make this an enjoyable experience? Our sexual energy is creative energy. Our creative energy is sexual energy. So it's just a matter of channeling that and tapping into that. If you feel really stagnant in your creativity, you're probably really dried up in your sexual flow too. And this is very common for a lot of women. And like one of the first things I think in the intro was talking about your juiciest desires, right? When we're dried up, our body is literally dried up. We're not connected to this flow. We're not connected to this energy that we have access to.
Yeah.
So different breathwork practices are a great way to tap into getting the energy moving, connecting with your nervous system in different ways. Getting outside is a huge piece. I love opening the door. I love opening my windows and letting some fresh air in. It seems again so simple, but if we have everything locked up and tied up, right? The energy literally just is stuck. It's stagnant. It can't move. And that's also reflective in our body.
Yeah, it makes me think about two things. So one is just like, for me, a big thing that I used to love to do as a kid and still love to do is like dance and movement, that feels very freeing. And I think often we live, especially women, probably men too, but or people of all genders, but
Mm-hmm.
certainly women, is it like the way you move is exercise, and you
Mm.
exercise to change your body, and you exercise to make your body smaller. Like, it
Yes.
just becomes very constricting and restricting versus free flowing, moving freely, moving your energy, right? And so I think about, just I like to talk to people about like shifting your relationship with movement so that it actually feels good in the process. And
Yes.
maybe you want to do that CrossFit workout. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And right, like we definitely seem to have an orientation towards our bodies. And I think women are often socialized this way, which is like, you have to change it. There's something wrong with it. It shouldn't look the way it looks. It shouldn't have the hair it has. It shouldn't smell the way it smells. It should, right? Like there's this whole change, constrict, shrink thing, which then causes us to get all tight, right? And
Yep.
so it's like, how can you move, right? Like, how can you
Open
breathe
up.
fully if it's breath work, right? How can you move fully if it's movement, right? So you can kind of get out of those constrictions. And, the other thought I had is you were talking, is that often what I hear from, high achieving professional women is, I don't, like, sort of what you're saying, I don't have time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a framework, and I get that because I sometimes feel that way, especially with a child and a new mom. Like, time is very different, and the availability of my time to do what I want feels very different than it did before. And I often think the trap we fall into is thinking that doing something like a meditation or taking a walk or, whatever it is that will be restorative, that we think about it as taking away from. It's going to take away from my family. It's going to take away from the time I have to work. It's going to take away. But the truth is that it's additive.
Absolutely.
Right? The truth is that if you take the time to meditate or to take a walk in nature or to dance for 10 minutes, it's actually additive to your energy, to your mental health, to your mindset, right? Like, it's additive to your family, it's additive to everything. And so I think some of it is shifting our framework around these things, like taking, like moving away from what we've been socialized into, which is taking time for yourself, doing something for yourself is taking away from your family. It's selfish. It's A, B, C, X, Y, Z. Versus like, no, pouring into myself is additive.
Yes.
And it helps me to show up for myself and show up for all the other people that are important in my life in the way I want to.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree. And I think a simple thing, there was a phase of my career where I was doing in-home speech therapy. And so I was coaching parents to work with their kids and empowering them. What's the best way to incorporate my child in the regular schedule that would incorporate communication, encourage communication? And so I think I say that because I feel like it's something that parents specifically, for example, say, oh, I don't have time for this because my kid is, takes up my time or whatever. What if you invited your child to meditate with you? And even if they're young, just your presence of being in that calm state is, again, going back to those mirror neurons. You're showing by being with your child what it's like to be in a meditative flow state. And I even want to invite people to think outside of the box of what meditation could mean for you. For me, I have lots of ways to meditate. When I'm doing the dishes, I'm in meditation. When I'm moving my body and dancing, I'm in meditation. When I'm gardening, I'm meditating. So it doesn't need to necessarily be, you're sitting on the floor with nothing happening in your mind. I think that's a huge misconception because that's just not the reality. Life is life, It's just, can you give yourself a few moments to be somewhat reflective and invite people in your life to join you on that journey? You can do it on your own. You don't necessarily need to do it on your own. You can invite other people to experience that inner reflection with you. And maybe it's balance. Maybe you go to your car and you meditate for 5 minutes, and then you come back and you meditate with your partner for another 5 minutes, or whatever it is, with your kids. I think that there's a lot we make it very overcomplicated, because again, we're all in
Mm-hmm.
our head. How can we make what something
Mm-hmm.
that I'm already doing, um, and make it a little bit more reflective, make it a little bit more enjoyable, make it
Mm-hmm.
something that is inclusive of the people that I love, and also pouring into myself at the
Mm-hmm.
same time.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And it's sort of making me think of, your reference to ancient wisdom, right?
Mhm.
And part of it is that our lifestyles have gotten so far from how our ancestors lived. And a
Yes.
lot of, we have modern technology and plumbing and all these things, right? Which are great.
Mhm.
And, right, we miss out and lose the simplicity, the pleasant presence, you were mentioning earlier, like true connection, right?
Mhm.
Even in the last 20, 30 years, right? I see young people and it's like, or you go out now with your friends and people are on the phone, right? Which is
Yeah.
like, that wasn't actually the case when we were growing up,
Mhm.
is that there were, flip phones or no phones. And so you were
Yeah.
just present, right?
Yeah.
And so now, because of technology and the pace at which we live, it means that we have to be more intentional about
Exactly.
the things, about living in a way that used to just be the way people lived, because there
Mhm.
really wasn't another, like, okay, maybe people listen to the radio or when TV, like for an hour, or watch TV
Mhm.
for an hour and then it was off, right?
Mhm.
And so it forces us to increase our intentionality, and it's worth it. And I also think it's useful that you're providing a lot of different ways for people to start, because this isn't about like you have to overhaul your life and go off the grid,
Right.
right? It's like, what are the small ways that you can tune in, start creating space for yourself, connecting more deeply to yourself, and then connecting to other people. And then you start small and you build on it, and it's reinforcing as you go along.
Absolutely. And exactly, because these are all practices, right? And it's cool that you can just add these things to your practice tool belt, your embodiment tool belt of, okay, when I start to notice that I'm feeling stressed, and when you start to tune in, right, and you get in those places of reflection, you notice, okay, this is the little whisper that my body gives me when I'm feeling stressed. And if I don't listen to it, this is the next level volume, and then this is the next level volume, and then this is the next level volume, where then my body is screaming at me, telling you,
Mm,
sit your ass down, right? So if you
mm-hmm.
can start tuning in at the lower volumes, your body doesn't need to scream to you.
Yep.
So these are the practices that you can start to implement so that you don't get to the point of your body needing to yell at you.
Yep.
And you have different practices to use at any point. Okay, I'm noticing my heart rate is really fast right now. Let me just take a pause. Hang on. Let me tune into my breath. Let me try this practice, this breathwork practice, this pranayama practice to help regulate my breathing, and then I can come back to the conversation. Or actually,
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now. I need to go outside. I need to go for a walk. Can we come back to this?
Mm-hmm.
And these kind of practices, like, I wish I had these practices when I was young, right? And
Mm.
I think that's why it's so powerful to include your family in these things, to include your children. You don't need to do this in isolation. If you're teaching your children these kind of things early on, oh my goodness, I wish these things were taught in school. Many
Mm-hmm.
times, that was why so many kids loved coming into my room for very truthfully,
Mm.
because it was a space of calm. It wasn't chaos.
Yeah.
And that's what, as adults, we get to create an internal and therefore an external environment of calm
Mm-hmm.
without
Yeah.
without it.
Yeah. And I think you're so right. Kids know it. I'm just even thinking, my parents were here this past weekend. My dad is super calm. My dad told me when I was in my early 20s, like, you really should meditate every morning. And I was like, I roll, whatever.
Uh-huh.
Like, and,
Mhm.
later came around. It took a
Mhm.
while.
Mhm.
But my daughter, like, kept going to him.
Mhm.
Right. And I think it's really because he has such a calm gentle presence, and she could feel that. And she
Absolutely.
doesn't sort of actively go to a lot of people, but she kept going to him and
Mhm.
returning to him because I think she felt his calm and felt
Mhm.
his presence. And kids really pick up on it, and
Oh,
adults
yeah.
pick up on it too, right? Like
Mhm.
we all know the feeling of being with someone who is calming, and we feel their calm energy versus people who are stressed and frazzled,
Yes.
and we sort of feel that as well.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing
Yeah.
your wisdom and sharing so many great tidbits of ideas for people to kind of incorporate these practices into their own life. So for those of you listening, I really hope that maybe you'll choose even just one thing that
Mhm.
Mohini has mentioned, whether it's taking a walk or getting in nature or doing something you love to do as a child, or, breath work, or, whatever it is, choosing one thing and then seeing how it feels to do that for a few days in a row, and notice what comes up for you. Notice how that feels, because that is really going to help you to incorporate this into your life in a bigger way. So I know that people are going to want to connect with you further and follow you and kind of know how to learn more about kind of what you share with the world. So tell people where they can find you.
Yes. So the best place to find me is on Instagram, and my handle is at I am, and then my first name, Mohini, Mohini. My last name, Gima, Gima. So I am Mohini Gima, because that's who I am. And I also have a free resource for people who are looking to drop into and listen to the wisdom of their womb space. And this is not about gender, whether you have a womb, a physical womb or not. This is about the energy of that space. And so that creative sexual energy that I was speaking of earlier, this resource will help you really understand how you can connect to that a little bit deeper for yourself. Simple practices, really simple. Again, I think that's why we tend to not implement, is because it almost seems too simple. But again, if we're not prioritizing ourself and our well-being, it's so easily overlooked, and we just keep it moving. And so this is, again, it's as intentional. This is for you to create that deeper self intimacy with yourself, pour into yourself, choose yourself, so that you can have that then be reflected in your relationships, with all of your relationships. So you can also find that on my Instagram. And yeah, it's a really beautiful resource that I loved creating. It was really fun for me to get into that creative flow state and share that as a resource for people.
I love that. And we will link your Instagram page and can link the free resource in the show notes. So if you're listening and you're like, yes, I want that, it sounds amazing, be sure to look in the show notes. You'll see the link. You'll see the link to follow Mohini on IG and get that free resource. So thank you again. This has been really wonderful. And I know that the listeners are going to get so much out of it. I have gotten so much out of it, like ideas of things that I can just be even more connected and mindful with myself. So I really appreciate you sharing your time, your energy, and your wisdom with me.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for having me. And I would love to hear what wisdom, what nuggets people got from this. So like send me a DM and let me know, hey, I heard you on the podcast and this is what I took from it. I implemented this and it was great. Yeah, keep me posted. I would love to hear.
Awesome. Let us know. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Mohini. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for joining me this week on the Unconditionally Worthy podcast. Make sure to visit my website, dradiagooden.com, and subscribe to the show